We're talking about hoarding. I was going to tell you a story about a group from, where did they come down from? Alaska. They came down from Alaska. They headed for Arizona. They had to cross the border. First they had to go through Canada to get there. And when they came across the border patrol stopped them. They were driving a semi-truck, and the truck smelled strange. And they didn't like the smell of the truck. So they had them open up the back, and the truck was full of dogs in cages. It's not that sad a story. There were only 3 of them that were dead. They had 170 dogs in the back of their semi-truck. They were all collies, as odd as that seems. They were hoarders of collies. So they confiscated the truck, and they sent it to Great Falls. This is up on the Canadian border. Great Falls is about the middle of Montana. It's about 150 miles away. So they sent it to Great Falls, and then they charged these people with cruelty to animals. Of course, they came across the Canadian border, and they had every right in the world to stop them. 170. They had actually stopped once on their way to, and they tried to walk all the dogs, and they couldn't get them all out. That's 170. You have to unpack all 170 crates. Anyway, so they charged him with cruelty to animals. They went to court. They had to hold them as evidence. So they had to maintain 170 dogs. They were all collies, as interesting as that was. It took them like 6 months to get this whole thing adjudicated. Then after they adjudicated, they had to do something with the dogs because the judge decided that they weren't responsible enough to be able to take care of 170 dogs. And they weren't going to put them back in the crates, put them back on the semi, and go ahead and send them to Arizona. These people now live in Phoenix, by the way. The people who were coming
So
down
much
from
animal cruelty goes on in
I don't know what they charged them with animal or cruelty to animals. They told them that they couldn't have more than 3 pets, so they took 3 of the dogs, and none of the dogs they took were collies. The rest, they had all these collies. What they were doing, they were breeding collies. They were trying to breed out some genetic disease that the collies had. But they were breeding them, they couldn't get rid of them. I don't know. Anyway. So they started distributing these collies throughout Montana. And my wife and I applied for a permit to get a collie, and we didn't get one. So we had enough dogs that it wasn't. That's my collie story. I have a goat story that's not nearly as nice. He's got his ear things on, doesn't he? He can't hear me. Okay. This guy out by Fort Peck. He decided that he was going to start accumulating goats. And he had about 25 acres and a barn. There was a barn there. There was a water source, but the water source only ran in the summertime. It never didn't work in the winter. Anyway, so he accumulated 250 goats on his 25 acres. That's not so many, is it? It's 10 per acre. That's not so bad. They're goats, okay? And they had a barn. Anyway, they found them. He decided that he didn't like doing it anymore. Yeah. He didn't like doing it anymore. So he decided to abandon them. Well, what do you do with 250 goats? It's out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, somebody found them. The reason they found them was because they started noticing dead goats. As it turned out, all 250 goats died. Because he wasn't feeding them, they had denuded the property. 25 acres of Montana grass isn't very much. They had, 250 goats. They're going to eat up all the grass pretty quickly. They couldn't escape because the fence was too high. He did a good job of building a fence. They found them all over the place. I mean, they were just all over the place, and they were all dead. So they charged him with cruelty to animals, except he had sold the property. And when he sold the property, he claimed that he sold the goats at the same time. Anyway, so yeah, I know. I went to court, and they were trying to decide who's to blame. He says it's not my fault. I sold them 6 months ago, and of course he had
he had just sold the property. He hadn't sold the goats. Goats aren't the same as property, are they? Ugly, ugly stories. Hoarders. So there are animal hoarders out there. And of course, Montana is one of those states where there's a lot of individualistic individuals that think that they should be able to do whatever they want. We see the same thing up in Alaska. We see the same thing in North Dakota. A lot of individuals that are really strange hoarders. There was a case not very long ago of the bird lady of Albuquerque. Yeah, okay. She had lots and lots of birds. Anyway, so I looked this up. You guys are talking about grieving, and grief was one of the causes of hoarding, but there were a lot of other reasons. The number one reason was depression. The individual was depressed. So they accumulated all these animals to get affection, they hoarded because of depression. Another had to do with dementia. That was the second leading cause. The third leading cause was childhood trauma, as strange as that may seem. But we're going to talk about childhood trauma in just a second and how much trouble it causes. The fourth leading cause is ADHD, as interesting as that is. Fifth leading cause was alcoholism, and the sixth leading cause was grief. And then the last cause that they mentioned was narcissism. If they were narcissistic, and that's why they accumulated whatever, or didn't throw anything away. As odd as that seems. Anyway, hoarding. So how do we treat hoarding? It's tough. It's tough to deal with. It's tough to deal with obsessive compulsive disorder. It's tough to deal with hoarding disorder. There's little information or pharmacotherapy for hoarding. There's not a lot that we can do about it. We can't give you a pill and make you not want to accumulate whatever it is that you're accumulating. Most of these problems are chronic problems. Well, not the depression, of course. The dementia, of course, you're never going to recover from dementia. It just continues to get worse. Childhood trauma will always be there. The ADHD will stick with you for your entire life. Of course, we can cure their alcoholism, and potentially we can cure their hoarding at the same time. A multi-component cognitive behavioral intervention is sometimes used. We utilize ERP, exposure and response prevention. It's where you gradually expose the hoarder to discarding and non-acquiring situations. If you've ever watched the television show, that's how they try to cure those guys, is with ERP. They try to get them to throw something away. And if they can throw one thing away, then maybe they can get them to throw the second thing away. Or they try to throw away a category of stuff, broken coat hangers or whatever. You know, it's just the problem is, of course, you can never get them to throw everything away, because once they start throwing a category away, like the broken hangers, they start accumulating something else. They replace it with something else. We see this with people with OCD. A lot of times, if you can get them to stop turning it off and on the light, they start washing their hands relatively frequently. If we can get somebody to stop, wait a minute. If we can cure somebody of alcoholism, a lot of times they replace their obsessive behavior with gambling. I see this all the time. They replace it with gambling. So OCD is a tough one. It's a really tough disorder to deal with. Together with training in organizing and decision-making skills and cognitive therapy for dysfunctional beliefs, it was very effective using these techniques on 23 different hoarders. Is that enough? Can we say that this works because it worked on 23 different people? It's not enough, is it? There's a lot of people out there that are hoarders. And there's a lot of different reasons for their hoarding. So what we have to do is we have to deal with whatever their reasons are, whatever the reason that they started hoarding. And of course, if it's dementia, there's nothing we can do about it. Grief, eventually you're going to get over grief. Hopefully, eventually you're going to get over grief. But some people don't, unfortunately. Trichotillomania is the pulling of your hair to the point where you have a noticeable hair loss. Trichotillomania. I hope you've never seen anybody like this. A lot of times they'll play with some of their hair. They'll play with the hair on the right side of their head. They'll pull their eyebrows. They'll pull their eyelashes until they don't have eyelashes anymore. It's known as trichotillomania. It is a tic disorder, kind of. In a way, it's a tic disorder. It's a compulsion that they have. Episodes of hair pulling, which can be centered on any area of the body, but most often include your scalp, your eyebrows, your eyelashes. It occurs in bouts that may be brief or may extend for hours. They may do it, they usually do it without thinking. They're watching television, so they're pulling on something, they're yanking on something. I had a friend that he had trichotillomania, but it was hard to convince him that he did. What he would do, he'd chew on his mustache. He had a big bushy mustache, but he chewed on it, and he could only get the parts of it, and it was kind of a Fu Manchu thing. So he had his Fu Manchu was pretty thick, but right above his lip, where he could chew on it, where he could curl his lip under, it was really thin. It was kind of cool. It was weird. Anyway, I tried to convince him he had trichotillomania, and couldn't convince him. Likelihood of hair pulling often is higher under stress, but also occurs when a person is relaxed or distracted, such as if they're watching television or playing on the internet. Increasing tension or urge to resist precedes the act, which itself is associated with pleasure, gratification, or relief. And it's usually, of these three, it's usually relief. It's when they're not under stress anymore, and they're relieved, and they're just sitting there, and they'll do whatever it is that they do. Pull their eyebrows, they'll pull their hair, whatever. To qualify, significant distress or impairment is present and not associated with medical conditions such as a skin inflammation or another mental disorder. And I've got some pictures, I apologize. These individuals are suffering from trichotillomania. This is a little boy who also had ADHD, and that's really kind of interesting. But eventually they got him to stop pulling his hair, and of course the lady almost made herself bald in front, as attractive as that is. Hair loss is widely variable across cases, ranging from thinning to areas of baldness. Individuals often deny their hair pulling and attempt to hide the effects. They may avoid social situations due to embarrassment. Trichotillomania, once upon a time in the United States, and this wasn't that long ago, everybody wanted to have as much hair as possible. Basketball players were growing really big afros. Remember that? Remember when basketball players had, like Dr. J had the biggest afro in the world. I mean, it was huge. And then all of a sudden, Michael Jordan and, who's the other guy? Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley started in the NBA, and the next thing we know, they're shaving their heads. Both of those guys are shaving their heads. And after that, this whole hair thing just changed completely. Instead of the huge afros, the gorgeous afros that we had before, all of a sudden we've got bald-headed people. People didn't want to have bald heads before. They were embarrassed by their baldness, to the extent that they would buy hair pieces and put them on their heads. I don't know. Trichotillomania. Trichotillomania is associated with mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and various obsessive compulsive spectrum conditions, as well as personality disorders and intellectual disability. 12-month prevalence estimate. We see this a lot in individuals that are suffering from intellectual deficits. So if you see somebody with a relatively severe intellectual deficit, they do a lot of ritual movements, a lot of ritual actions. One of them, headbanging, of course, on the wall is one of them, but hair pulling is another. And they will pull their hair until it comes out. 12-month prevalence estimates in the United States are 1% to 2%, with females showing a ratio of 10 to 1 over males. So it's more frequent in females. And it may have something to do with females tend to have longer hair than males do. We shave men's heads. We cut their hair much shorter. So it's a lot harder to get at. But women, of course, they have all these interesting hairstyles, and I'm looking around the room, and everybody has lovely hair, and they have lovely hairstyles, but they're longer hair, so it's a little bit easier to get to. The course of disorder is variable, and the condition may come and go. It may remit, or it may persist into adulthood, of course, and we see this from time to time. Yeah, it's really kind of tragic. As you can see, they're pulling their hair out. Nervousness. or whatever. Trichotillomania. Causal, yes, sir.
Is that different from people who remove their eyebrows completely?
What are we plucking our eyebrows?
Yeah.
Okay, no, plucking your eyebrows is a beauty thing. We do that for good looks. I don't pluck my eyebrows. But yeah, no, they pluck them. It's relatively common and it's fairly painful. I understand. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't usually pluck my eyebrows. But every time I see it on a movie, the guy screams, you know, and the ladies go, "Oh, what are you screaming?" Evidently, women are tougher than men. But we said that in another class, didn't we? Yeah. The causes of trichotillomania are not well understood. It appears to aggregate in families. Some preliminary data indicate multiple gene involvement. It's similar to obsessive-compulsive disorder. It may suggest similar causal factors, but it differs from that condition in several ways as well, especially in the absence of obsessions. So it's just a compulsion to pull. You don't really have, it's not the thoughts. Sometimes you're doing this without even thinking about it. So the obsessiveness isn't there, but the compulsion is there. The most effective treatment for trichotillomania is habit reversal therapy, or HRT, a behavioral intervention that combines self-monitoring of hair pulling, training and awareness of high-risk situations that trigger hair pulling, stimulus control techniques to interfere with or prevent hair pulling, and alternate response interventions to require engagement in a substitute or incompatible activity when the temptation or urge to pull is present. Remember, these individuals don't realize that they're doing it. So what we have to do is make them aware of it. And if we can make them aware of it, we can find out what these situations are that cause them to pull their hair. And once we do that, we replace it with something else. We replace it with something. I know, that sounds so stupid, doesn't it? Why don't they gamble instead of pull your hair? Here, drink this beer instead of pulling your hair. The competing or incompatible response may include clenching a fist for 1 minute, and that's, I was being silly. I was talking about gambling. Now they just make them do something physical, because this is a physical act. So they want them to replace it with another physical act, and in that case, making a fist is one of them. People with excoriation, skin picking disorder, recurrently pick at their skin, causing bleeding, scarring, and infections. And of course, this is what it looks like. The condition tends to first appear in adolescence, often in association with acne. And most commonly involves the head or the face. It's kind of like being on crystal meth. If you've ever been around somebody that's on crystal meth, they pick on their faces they pick on things all the time. They think that they've got bugs crawling on them, so they're always this interesting erratic movement. Significant amounts of time, sometimes several hours per day, are spent in the activity of picking at these things. Excoriation disorder is commonly associated with comorbid anxiety and depression. Its incidence may be as high as 5% in clinical samples. Among the general population, the lifetime prevalence in adults is 1.4%, with females with a ratio of 3-to-1 ratio in prevalence over males. So it's, once again, it's a female thing. It's more of a female thing than a male thing. Excoriation disorder tends to run in families and is more common in individuals with OCD. And there are some pictures of individuals suffering from excoriation disorder. As you can see, you don't only have to pick your face, you can also pick the skin on your fingers. As ugly as that is, I apologize, I'm sorry. This is the way it works sometimes. Okay. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications may provide a degree of relief, although some case studies have not found medication to be very useful. It's a habit, just like trichotillomania. Intervention based on competing response training, or HRT, have been employed in behavioral therapies with some success as well. And here's a lady that picks her legs. She's asking Dr. Phil to talk about it on his television show. As interesting as that is. Anyway. Substance medication-induced obsessive compulsive and related disorders is another obsessive compulsive related disorder. It's repetitive body-focused behaviors that result from intoxication, withdrawal, or exposure to a medication. So it's obsessive compulsive disorder that has to do with being on a drug or medication. Obsessive compulsive and related disorders due to another medical condition is another one. Other specified obsessive compulsive and related disorders, these conditions do not meet the full criteria for obsessive compulsive related disorders. Unspecified obsessive compulsive and related disorders. So these are just added on things. We know what obsessive compulsive disorder is. If it doesn't quite fit, then we have these other categories that potentially we can put it into. And so that we can give them a diagnosis. Remember, we have to give them a diagnosis so that we can treat them. If we don't give them a diagnosis, we can't treat them. The insurance company won't pay. So we need to diagnose them with something. 29% of combat veterans from Vietnam suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. 29%. 22% more suffer from stress-related problems. 10% of the veterans from the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War is what we're talking about, still suffer from PTSD more than 45 years later. It's actually more than 45 years later. My brother still has PTSD. The other day I started suffering from PTSD. I didn't realize it until after. I didn't know what the trigger was. Actually, I did know what the trigger was. And I've been talking about it for 2 years now. I've been talking about mutton and how it bothers me. And the other day, I went down to that lecture, and the mutton had the strongest smell I've ever smelled. I had a bad weekend. I had a really bad weekend. So yeah, okay. So I got PTSD. I know I have it. So what do you do with PTSD? I mean, I didn't even know I had it until last Thursday. I had a bad Thursday. I had a real bad Thursday. It's because of what happened. And I apologize, I know that mutton is one of the things that you guys eat. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It's not because I hate Sheldon. It doesn't have, it has to do with the odor. The odor that when you cook it, it's the odor. And I just had, my war experiences had to do with, I had to pick up bodies. That was my job. And is this horrible? From airplane crashes. And when airplanes crash, they burn. And when they burn, then whoever's inside gets burned. Okay. All right. That's my problem. And I know I've got it now. And the reason I know I've got it is because I suffered from it last Wednesday. I couldn't stay. I had to get out of it. And then I couldn't get rid of it all weekend. I went home and I washed my clothes. I went home and I took a shower until the water heater didn't have any hot water in it anymore. You understand what I'm talking about? Okay? So I know I've got it. And I got to stay away from it, and I apologize. There's nothing I can do about it. You can't get around that. All right? And I appreciate you guys telling Sarah, there's something, Sarah's got to have mutton. I have no idea why she does this. And I told her about it, and she's not going to do anything about it, and that's okay. But you guys are going to have steak at your, of the people that are graduating, you're going to have steak, and I appreciate that. Thank you. If it was mutton, I couldn't do it. Yeah, so, and I don't know, I'm sure it didn't have anything to do with me, you guys just wanted the steak. That's okay. But I'm giving you 2 thumbs up for that, thank you very much.
They're going to switch it back.
Are you going to switch it back? For me? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. See, this is how much they love me. I tell them that I love them all the time. So how do they repay me? With mutton. Most people haven't had the same experiences that I had. Why in the hell would anybody have the same experiences that I had? I mean, I was the one that had to, I was the guy that had to pick up the bodies. I was the guy that had to do autopsies on the bodies. So there's no reason that anybody else would have the same reaction that I did. But that was my job, and that's what's happened. And like I said, I apologize. I knew when I came down here that mutton was a possibility that I'd come in contact with mutton. I knew that, and I almost didn't take this job because of it. But you can stay away from it. I mean, most people don't eat mutton, do they? Do they?
Yeah.
It's too expensive.
The Greeks
Yeah.
do. But if you can stay away from the Greeks, you can stay away from Navajos. You can stay away from mutton.
I know my brother and my sisters, they don't eat it.
Well,
I mean, they don't.
I'm sure it's not the same reason.
Yeah, yeah, they just don't.
And there are other veterans that have the same reaction that I do. But it all depends on what your experience is. Okay? So I've got it, all right? And I apologize. I'm gonna, if we ever have one of those lectures again and they have mutton down there, I ain't coming. I'm sorry. I can't be there. It just hurts. And it sticks with you for an extended length of time. And that's PTSD. I have PTSD. My brother's got PTSD. My dad had PTSD from World War II. And I know it now. And so I can deal with this. And I will have to deal with this. But I've been okay up to this point. Until last Wednesday night.
You know, an odd phenomenon, I don't know if there's something you can describe from this, but I've noticed that family members, people that didn't go to Iraq, wives and kids, will suffer some kind of stress disorder as well because they're around veterans. It's a really weird thing. It's like it transfers almost.
They're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
They don't know what the triggers are. And they're afraid they're going to trigger a reaction. That's what it is. But you're right.
Is that its own disorder?
No, it's not.
It's just stress, being stressed
Just
out.
stress, just stress from dealing with the PTSD. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, okay, so 22% of these are Vietnam vets we're talking about. And of course, we didn't even know what PTSD was until the 1980s. Vietnam ended in 1975, and it took them almost 10 years to come up with the diagnosis. Why? Because they didn't want to pay for it. Here's what else was happening. 25% of the returning combat veterans had been arrested for some crime within 2 years of the return. Now, the last veterans came back in 1975. So all these guys were being incarcerated, and so what did the feds do about it? What did the VA do about it? Nothing. They didn't do anything about it, because if they admitted that there was a problem, they would have had to have paid for it. And we were trying to save money back in the 70s. We're always trying to save money. We're trying to save money any way that we possibly can. Their divorce rate was twice that of the general population. My PTSD doesn't have anything to do with either of my divorces, I don't think. Their suicide rate was 25% higher than the general population. We have lost over 60,000 Vietnam vets to suicide. Only 57,000 people died in the war. And we've lost over 60,000. It took about 30 years, but we have more suicides than we have combat deaths now. PTSD, as the name implies, occurs sometime after the traumatic event. Acute stress disorder is a reaction to the stress soon after its occurrence. The two disorders have the same symptoms, only the time of onset separates them. The symptoms include re-experiencing the traumatic event, whatever the traumatic event is, and that's what my problem was this weekend. I couldn't go to sleep because if I went to sleep, I was picking bodies out of airplane crashes, and that's the most fun thought in the world. Avoidance, people will avoid activities that remind them of the trauma, and I've stayed out of Greek restaurants ever since 1971, I guess. I'd stay out of Greek restaurants because they make their souvlaki and all that other stuff. Pita, and my wife, I keep telling her I can't get around this stuff, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. Well, let's go to the Greek restaurant. How does she do it? She must hate me. She's trying to make me crazy or something. Maybe that's why I got 3 ones. Reduced responsiveness, they feel detached from other people. And of course, that's the way I was feeling last Wednesday night. Increased arousal, anxiety, and guilt. They may feel overly alert and startled easily. This is especially with combat veterans coming back from Vietnam. They may feel guilty that they survived while others more worthy did not. I told you the story of my brother. They helicoptered him out, and when he came back, his unit had been overrun, and they had no survivors. The only survivors from his unit were the ones that went out with him, the wounded, and him. He wasn't wounded, he had to go back. The reason he had to go back was because my dad was a colonel in the Army, and he had asked my brother to communicate with him. This is a tragic story. I know. You'll be all right. Often after a natural disaster, people will suffer from acute stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. The terrorist attack on the World Trade Center has created many people who have the symptoms of the stress disorder. Rape is another form of trauma that can lead to acute stress and PTSD. 1 in 7 women is raped sometime in her life. 29% are under the age of 11. 32% are between the ages of 11 and 17. 29% are between 18 and 29. Isn't that odd? So the females that are raped the most frequently are females between the age of 11 and 17. As ugly as that is, 80% of the rapes are by acquaintances or relatives. As ugly as that is. Rape has a long-lasting as well as an immediate effect on the mental status of the victim. One study showed that 94% of the victims qualified for a clinical diagnosis of acute stress disorder 12 days after the assault. Studies done in 1992 through 1996 showed that women who had been raped had poorer physical well-being after the rape and visited their physicians twice as frequently than they did before they were raped. Not everyone who suffers a trauma develops a stress disorder, of course. Researchers have discovered that traumatic events trigger physical changes in the brain and the body that may cause the stress disorder. One of the things that we discovered from Vietnam was the individuals that were the most likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder were the ones that had suffered a trauma in their during their childhood. Didn't have to be physical abuse, didn't have to be sexual abuse, it just had to be a trauma. Well, I thought about this, and I thought about what happened to my brother. My brother had rheumatic fever in the 2nd grade, and he didn't go to school for a year. And of course, once he did go to school, of course, he had to make new friends. It's like he was a new kid in school. So that was fairly traumatic for him. And he actually didn't make friends very well until he was in high school and started playing baseball. And he was a really good baseball player. It's kind of easy to make friends when you're a good athlete. Anyway, doesn't seem fair, does it? Anyway, okay, so this is one of the things that we discovered from Vietnam. That's the guys that had suffered the traumas before. Listen.
I noticed too a lot of people that bounce back are people who suffered traumas in childhood but were able to
Be resilient.
Yeah, they were able to
Exactly.
into war. They were able to put it in perspective a lot quicker than everybody else was.
Right. The other thing has to do with control. The more control you feel, the less likely you're going to suffer PTSD. So it was the lower-ranking individuals that suffered more PTSD than the officers of the NCO. Very rarely happened with officers, and it happened less frequently with NCOs, or the higher-ranking NCOs. The people that had control are the ones happened to them. The individuals that had no control, the ones that were told to go and take that pill, those were the ones that suffered the most. And of course, from this, the whole reason that we even came up with the diagnosis of PTSD was because of the guys coming back from Vietnam. But now, of course, we can apply this to anybody that has been in a trauma. So the more control you feel during the trauma, or while you're going through the trauma, the less likely you'll suffer from the PTSD. As interesting as that is. If we can lower the stress level, of course, we can make it less likely that you'll suffer from PTSD. One of the things they found out in Iraq and Afghanistan was the higher your DHEA level, I just talked about this in health class, health psychology class, the higher your DHEA level while you're suffering the stress, the less likely that you will suffer from PTSD. As interesting as that is. And that has to do with control. The more control you have, the more DHEA that you're going to produce. It's a DHEA to cortisol ratio that we're talking about.
Does sleep and going through all those stages of REM affect that? Because one of the things I noticed was when I was in Iraq, there's the group of soldiers that are support that never leave the base.
Right.
And then there's those that go out every day that don't get
Right.
much sleep. Their
Right.
sleep is always interrupted. It's
Sleep deprived, they're not getting as much REM as they now, as much delta wave sleep as they.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I noticed another thing with PTSD too, is the thing that they call moral injury. People that did things that made sense in combat.
Mhm.
But then they come back, they have a hard time
Right.
readjusting because it doesn't make sense over here.
Right. Right.
Things that were justifiable over there
Sure.
under the circumstances.
Right.
And they come back, they,
Can't reconcile it.
yeah, they can't
Right.
reconcile.
That's a good point. Okay, so the researchers have discovered that traumatic events trigger physical changes in the brain. Of course, we already know that. The neurotransmitter norepinephrine and the hormone cortisol are present in the human body in large amounts after a traumatic episode. Some researchers feel that sensitive personalities may react to the stress biochemicals more negatively than those that are less sensitive people. I always thought that I was immune to PTSD, mainly because I'm so callous about things that happen. I worked in the emergency room, saw all this stuff, I dealt with all this stuff, no problems whatsoever. But I seem to be talking more about my picking up the bodies, the airplane crash bodies, since I've been here. And it may have something to do with the smell of mutton. As strange as that sounds, mutton smells, well, we won't go into that, but yeah, okay. But I seem to be talking about it more, and it may be because I'm suffering more from it because I'm smelling mutton more frequently. And of course, the odor reminds me of that episode. So as long as I can stay away from the smell, I'm okay. So how in the world do you get over PTSD? You talk about your experiences. And now, of course, in order to dissipate the pain of the thought, I'm talking about, the bodies that I think more than I ever did before. So you guys are doing therapy on me, and I appreciate you allowing me to do therapy. Because without this, it hurts. I mean, I had a really bad week. Like I said, I had a bad week. I had a hard time sleeping.
Probably refer you to Crystal Gazer.
I'm sorry?
Refer you to Crystal Gazer.
I don't know if that would work with me.
Yeah, white people get it.
It works for white people? Okay, maybe I should try it.
If you're receptive to it.
If I'm receptive to it. Sheldon's in the back laughing. I don't know if it's going to I should never listen to Sheldon.
I was thinking about, you brought this up one time too, I think one of your relatives that got out and they didn't start suffering PTSD until they got out. I think they're suffering during the service, it's just that.
There's people to talk to, and they understand how you.
I joined during peacetime, right after the first Iraq conflict.
Right.
And those guys that joined right after, those guys, when I think about it now, those guys were suffering from PTSD, but it actually made them better Marines. Because they were a little more mean.
Sure.
And they were a little more tougher on us. So it fit the bill. It's
Callous.
Yeah, and it's not till you get out.
Yeah. Did you understand what's going on?
You're like, what the heck? Your whole world falls apart.
Yeah.
And it almost like being in the service kind of helps you, not hide it, but it's advantageous.
You got somebody to talk to that understands what's going on.
And that camaraderie.
Yeah. I wasn't going to use the word shit, so I'm going to stay away from it. I'm okay. I'm not going to use the word. Okay. Okay, so what are we doing here? Some researchers have found that people who develop stress the most readily are people who have psychological problems before the trauma, and that would be the individual that had suffered trauma earlier. Researchers have discovered that individuals growing up in poverty are more likely to develop stress when faced with trauma, and that's because they have been through trauma in their lives. All this is making sense. Other childhood experiences that bode PTSD, experiencing assault or abuse at a young age, lack of control, children who are younger than 10 when their parents divorce, which is a very traumatic event for the child. Individuals with weak social support are more likely to develop PTSD. And the social support, of course, that we're getting in the service is the fact that the people that you're around, the people that you run around with and talk to, are individuals that understand what you've been through. So it's a little bit easier to deal with it when you're in the service. Once you get out, nobody understands. I mean, you can talk to people. Sheldon still gives me a hard time about mutton. Thanks, Sheldon. What a nice fellow.
Do you think this has something to do too with a lot of the high school shootings, the school shootings? Because I noticed there's one of the trends is that they were saying that all but one had a father growing up, and a lot of them came from homes that were split up.
Okay.
And a lot of them were picked on at the school. They didn't go back and shoot the kids that picked on them, but they went back to the school where the trauma happened and shot them.
They shut up the school.
Yeah, that even happened in Aztec. The kid was, he had complained about being bullied when he was at school, and he went back to the school. He didn't go to after the people.
Right.
He went back to where the trauma happened,
Right.
where he kind of identified the trauma.
And it's possible that if he had gone back and those people had been there, because he was afraid of them, he had been bullied, he would have been able to shoot them anyway.
Would have been able to confront.
He would have been able to confront him. Exactly. That's a possibility. Of course, we don't know.
No, it's interesting you say that. I've met people who they pick up where they left off in high school with other people. I've seen that happen before. Where they haven't seen them in like 10, 15 years, and then they run into them and revert right back to that role. And I thought it was interesting.
I went back to my 50th reunion. Yeah, I went back to my 50th reunion, and it was exactly the same way. It was exactly the same way. We started treating those individuals as, you know, the pitcher on the baseball team and the highest scorer on the basketball team. We started acting as if that guy was still the star of the team. Despite the fact that it's 50 years later and he hasn't done jack squat in his life. I've got a PhD. The other guy that was talking to him had an MD. He was a doctor. And the other guy was a very important person as well. And here we are, we're acting like this guy's the most important person in the room. Hasn't done anything. He's been retired for the last 30 years. He never did anything with his life. All he did was brag about how good he was in high school. And here we are, we're treating him exactly the same way. After 50 years. It doesn't make any sense. Does it? Hell no, it doesn't make any sense. But which one of us... Oh, okay, we won't go into that. Okay. Okay, what are we doing? We're divorcing. Individuals with weak social support, the more severe the trauma, the more likely the individual, of course, will develop PTSD. Treatment, there are various forms of treatment. We can use Xanax to reduce our anxiety. That makes sense. We can use Desiril. This is what we used with the combat veterans from Vietnam. We're not doing that anymore. We don't use Desiril anymore. Desiril makes you jump over. It allows you to go to sleep at night. And the reason is because you don't have those intrusive dreams anymore. The reason you don't have the intrusive dreams is because you jump over the delta wave sleep and you go right into REM sleep. The problem is you don't have the sleep isn't as restful with the Desiril. We can use flooding, and we did this with Vietnam vets. I don't know, I was talking to some of you guys, I was talking about helicopters and how they bothered me. There was a helicopter that flew over last night. They're so quiet. They don't feel the same. You used to be able to feel them in your chest, but this helicopter flew over last night. I was thinking, that doesn't feel bad at all. That doesn't bother me at all. But that's what they did with the Vietnam vets. They put them in Hueys, and they took them up and flew them around. And it helped them dissipate their PTSD. So they used flooding to help them. Therapy to make them come to grips with their trauma, of course. And if somebody has never been through it, then you really don't understand. You can't possibly understand, and you don't want to understand, okay? You don't want to know what it smells like, okay? I have a strong sense of smell, unfortunately. It's really kind of tragic. Okay, that's the end of chapter 6. I'm starting chapter 7. This is the 7th week, and I'm starting chapter 7, so I'm caught up. I know everybody was worried about me being caught up. I get behind all the time, but I'm doing really well as far as staying up, as far as that goes. So the next time Sarah asks you if you want mutton, tell her no, okay? Just for me. She loves mutton. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. Harasses the hell out of me. I don't know. Anyway, this is a chapter about somatic symptoms and dissociative disorders. This is a very controversial chapter. Somatic symptoms have to do with your body having physical symptoms of a mental illness. So you're having physical symptoms. You're having a pain in your leg, despite the fact that because of your depression or whatever. Dissociative disorders are where you kind of separate yourself from your own self. Dissociative. So these are extremely controversial. The reason they're controversial is because you can lie about being sick. You can lie about being separated from yourself. You can make all this stuff up. Dissociative identity disorder is very controversial. There are a lot of psychologists, including maybe somebody here at this institution. You'll have to ask them. I don't know. I haven't really. Every time I talk to them, I get in an argument. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get into arguments. Anyway, when I talk to them, a lot of times we get into arguments about this stuff. Is dissociative identity disorder, does it actually exist? That's a real serious question. Being in the military, we saw a lot of people that were lazy and didn't want to do anything, who acted like they were sick. And this is, of course, in the military, it's called malingering. Well, that's what it's called in psychology as well. I hope you didn't run into any of those jerks. Most of them were from New York and Chicago. I don't know why. I don't know if it has anything to do with the city. The city people are so... They don't want to do anything. They don't want to get the job done. They want you to do the job so that they don't have to do the job. Just like, okay, well, we won't talk about that guy. Anyway, okay, so malingering. We're going to talk about malingering. Somatic symptom disorders concern bodily symptoms which are thought to have psychological causes. So you have physical symptoms to your psychological problems. Those are somatic symptom disorders. Dissociative disorders concern certain disruptions of consciousness, memory, and identity. Can you fake it? You can fake both of these very, very easily, and that's one of the reasons why they are so controversial. It's going to be a tough chapter to talk about. These two categories of disorders were important to the founding and development of psychoanalytic thinking. These disorders are unusual, and sometimes they are controversial. Conditions. Somatic symptoms and dissociative disorders in which unusual symptoms cannot be confirmed apart from self-report may be difficult to distinguish from circumstances in which individuals intentionally fake their symptoms to receive some gain. And this is known as malingering. It's the same thing in the military. We talk about malingering. As a medic in the military, one of my jobs was to determine if that person was really sick, and if that person was as sick as they said that they were. There are hypochondriacs who think they are sicker than they actually are. And that was one of my jobs, was determining if these people were really as sick as they said they were. And sometimes they were, and usually they weren't, because they didn't want to lift those rocks. They didn't want to move that, they didn't want to paint that building. They didn't want to do something. When I was in the military, one of the things that we had to do, we had to move this whole train car load of stuff. We had to move this whole thing out of the train and onto the siding. That's what we were supposed to do. So they gave us dollars to do this with. Well, there were two guys that didn't pick up a dolly and they didn't move anything. They were trying to figure out an easier way to do it, a better way to do it. You know these people, they're out there. They're always looking for a better way to do everything. And they didn't lift anything. We moved all that stuff out of that train car onto the siding, and they didn't do anything at all. Because they were trying to figure out a better way of doing it. So they were sitting there talking back and forth, trying to figure out a better way to move it and use that dollar. Maybe we can put more things on the dollar. They came up with all the excuses in the world, but they didn't move any damn thing. And we moved everything. Of course, we were farm boys, and we wanted to get the job done, and we wanted to go to lunch, and we wanted the sergeant to compliment us, so we actually did all the work, and they just sat there. So what happened to them? Nothing, of course, because they were trying to tell the sergeant that they were trying to come up with a better way of doing things. Malingering is not a mental disorder. It is included in the DSM-5 under other conditions that may be a focus of clinical attention under the subset of non-adherence to medical treatment. Malingering. So we have to talk about it because there are some people out there that actually don't have a mental illness that we need to identify. And we can attach this label to them as somebody that's trying to get away with something or get out of something. According to the DSM-5, malingering involves the intentional production of false or grossly exaggerated physical or psychological symptoms motivated by external incentives such as avoiding military duty, avoiding work, obtaining financial compensation, evading criminal prosecution, or obtaining drugs. Did anybody see the television show Bull last night? That's what Bull was about last night. On that show, there was a lady that claimed that she had schizophrenia, and she shot a policeman in the head and killed him. And she claimed that she was having a psychotic episode when it happened, and she didn't know anything about it. Okay. And Bull, of course, being a psychologist with 3 doctorates, he's got 3 doctorates, determined that she was malingering. He thought that she wasn't sick at all, that she actually didn't have schizophrenia, that she was a drug dealer. And that she shot the cop because the cop refused to work with her. Okay. So she was malingering. And of course it took an hour, but eventually we all figured out that the whole was correct. He solved the crime in an hour. And you know how he did it? Are you ready for this? She started having a psychotic episode. It looked like she was going to be prosecuted. So she started having a psychotic episode in the courtroom. And Bull, being the only doctor, especially the only psychologist though, came over and he said, give her a shot of this stuff. If she's having a psychotic episode, this will take care of it. He said, of course, if she's not really having a psychotic episode, it will paralyze her, and she may have seizures and die. And at that stage, she said, well, I'm not really having a psychotic episode. Bull is right, he fooled me, doggone it. And of course, she admitted it after that. Okay, anyway. Malingering, why would anyone report false symptoms or pretend to have a mental disorder? Imaginary or exaggerated symptoms may bring social attention that might not otherwise be available. It allows one to avoid an unpleasant obligation, or it creates a situation that frightens other unwanted people away. Just like in the movie or in the television show last night. People facing legal charges may attempt to portray themselves in a way that minimizes their personal legal responsibility. Remember, once upon a time, there was a lady by the name of Andrea Yates, and she drowned 5 of her children, all 5 of her children. And when she first went to trial, she was convicted of 5 counts of murder in Texas. Texas executes people. 5 murders is a lot. They weren't going to execute her. But she went back to court, and when she went back to court, they determined that she had postpartum depression. So she's in a mental hospital today. She's not on death row. She's not in prison. She's in a mental hospital because of that. So potentially, anyway, you can look at this any way you want. I was kind of happy that they convicted her of 5 counts of murder.
Can malingering go the other way too, to avoid being diagnosed with something?
Something else? So
Well-
you're trying to hide your symptoms
Yeah, well,
by acting like you're sick with something else?
Well, I knew a guy who, I actually know a couple of people who just didn't want to go to counseling for PTSD. They didn't want to get labeled with PTSD.
Right.
And so they were in trouble for alcohol-related incidences.
So they were drinking. That's how they were dissipating the
Yeah, but
symptoms.
they didn't want to be labeled with having PTSD,
Right.
so they played it all off. Because at that time, the issue of being labeled with PTSD was really frowned upon.
Sure.
It made it
Right.
seem like you were weak-minded,
Exactly.
so they really tried to avoid
Right.
getting diagnosed with PTSD. And it worked, but they got in trouble. They would rather get in trouble
For alcoholism than for
than be labeled with
having
PTSD.
PTSD. Well, I've been fighting it for 40 years. I didn't want to be labeled with PTSD, but I'm admitting it to you guys. In abnormal psychology. That's why we're in the world. Shouldn't do it. I'm admitting to you guys I have PTSD, and I can't handle the moment. I'm sorry. It's there, and I just can't stay. I can't deal with it. The smell stinks. I can explain it to you, but I don't want to explain it to everybody. I don't want to insult everybody. Or talk about dead bodies. You guys don't really want to talk about dead bodies. But that was my job. I mean, that was my job. Some people did it and some people didn't. And that was the job I had. That and collecting drug urines. That was a lot of fun. Watching people urinate? Ooh, it's on top of my list. Sorry. So you did whatever you did, you know. It was whatever they told you that you had to do. And it was my job to pick up these people. Former people. So we didn't even call them people. We call them other things to make us feel better, you know, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. So you do. So why are we doing this? People facing, okay, we've already talked about all this stuff. Financial benefits from federal agencies, insurance companies, trying to get money from insurance companies. Why do we malinger? Person is undergoing an evaluation for legal purposes. This is a situation in which it should be suspected. If the person is undergoing an evaluation for legal purposes, there's a really relatively high possibility that they're faking it. One study found an 8% malingering incident rate in criminal defendants undergoing psychiatric evaluation. So if you are doing a psychiatric evaluation and you're trying to determine if this person really does have a problem, about 10% of the time, 1 out of every 10 people is going to be lying to you. And you have to recognize this. You have to understand that this is maybe the way it is. So you've got to deal with it. A person's report of disability or distress is inconsistent with objective findings. And that's what Bull was saying last night. A person is uncooperative in the diagnostic evaluation. If antisocial personality disorder is present, often involving lying or conning for personal gain, people with antisocial personality disorder are liars. They're professional liars. They do it all the time. Who else lies? Who else is the best liar in the whole damn world? I'm sorry? They don't want to lie. They just comes out there. Who's the best liars in the world?
Lawyers.
Alcoholics.
Alcoholics. Thank you. Lawyers are not. That's not a
Lawyers.
pathology.
DSM-6. Give me the 6.
Liars. So alcoholics are really good because they want to keep drinking. They need an excuse to drink, so they lie in order to get to drink some more. Yeah. They create chaos all around them so that they can continue drinking. It's the way it works. Best liars in the world, except for the people with antisocial personality disorder. Malingering may be overrepresented among certain conditions such as PTSD and mild head injuries. And of course, this is a problem. How much insurance money are you going to get from the concussion that you got in that automobile accident? Well, maybe you're going to exaggerate your symptoms so that you get more money for it. It's worth money. Money's important. Not working is important. The somatic symptom and related disorders involve bodily symptoms that produce abnormal thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. The symptoms may or may not be medically explained. In the DSM-5, there is no longer a requirement, as there was in the DSM-4, that supporting physical evidence be absent. The symptoms for most somatic symptoms disorders are not intentionally produced or faked. Factitious disorder is the exception to this. So they may not be faking. It's just the fact that their body feels something that their brain is actually telling them. They're not really lying in this case, or are they? We're going to talk about factitious disorders in just a second. How much time do we have? Okay. The DSM-5 extensively modified DSM-4's somatoform categories. Body dysmorphic disorder was moved to the obsessive compulsive and related disorders. If I taught this class 2 years ago, well, wait a minute, 2013. If I taught this class in 2012, I would have been talking about body dysmorphic disorders in this chapter, not in the obsessive compulsive chapter. Several conditions such as hypochondriasis, somatization disorder, pain disorder, and undifferentiated somatoform disorder were removed, and the symptoms they classified were redistributed to new syndromes that are less concerned with unexplained medical symptoms and more concerned with the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors the sufferers experience. These changes may lead to improved reliability of the diagnosis. In the DSM-5 field trials, complex somatic symptom disorder scored a kappa of 0.61, earning it a very good reliability classification. So at least we know that it is a good classification. Unlike malingerers, people with factitious disorder invent or exaggerate their symptoms for no obvious reason apart from playing sick. Factitious disorder. We used to call it Munchausen syndrome. Yeah. Munchausen syndrome. So they're making stuff up. Or they're actually injecting themselves with something to make themselves sick. Yeah. They're trying to make themselves seem like they're sick. They get more attention that way. Munchausen syndrome.
And you usually hear of that happening with parents doing that to their children.
We're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay. The fabrication is not the result of another condition such as psychotic or delusional disorder. In other words, they don't have another problem, and it's making them create this factitious problem, this fabrication. DSM-5 specifiers for factitious disorder include single episode and recurrent episode. Usually the episodes are intermittent. Whenever they're feeling like the old man isn't paying enough attention to them, all of a sudden they come down with migraine headaches or asthma or whatever. Once upon a time when I was working in, where was it? Oklahoma, I was working in a rural health clinic. We had this lady that kept coming in with migraine headaches. Stop me if you've heard this story. She kept coming in with migraine headaches. And we were sticking her so much, we had stuck her so much that we would give her Demerol. We were sticking her so much that we couldn't just stick the needle in her and inject the medicine. It didn't work anymore. It was shooting back out. She had become so porous. We had stuck her so much that we couldn't stick her that way anymore. So we had to Z-track her. You know what Z-track is? We had to stick the needle. We took a 3-inch needle and we stuck it in an inch, and then we turned it 90 degrees. I know, doesn't that sound horrible? And then we stuck it in another inch, and
Turned again.
and we turned it again. When we actually Z-tracked it. It was the only way we could keep the medicine in her body. Yeah, exactly. I know, it's a lot of fun. This lady, oh jeez, she was nuts. She was so crazy. She would come in with a migraine headache and she would want her Demerol. And she would demand her Demerol. She'd go up to the receptionist and she'd say, I need a shot of Demerol. And this one time she called ahead. It's like making a pizza, making sure it's finished by the time that she gets there. So she got there. It took her 15 minutes to get to the clinic, and she got there, and she starts stripping down in the entranceway. She's stripping down so that we can give her a shot. She's almost naked by the time she walked back to the back. And I was the one that had to shoot her that day. Wow, what a day. Anyway, so I gave her a shot. Gave her a shot at Demerol. This is how we cured her. She didn't have migraine headaches at all. Okay, she did have migraine headaches. She thought she had migraine. That wasn't a problem. Every time her husband called and said, honey, I'll be home tonight. He was a long-haul truck driver. And every time he called and said, honey, I'll be home tonight, Guess what happened? She got a headache. And she'd have to come over for a shot. Every time her husband called. So how did we cure her? She started having an affair with somebody else. It doesn't have, we didn't cure her. I'm just kidding. She started having an affair with somebody else, and she divorced her husband. And once she divorced her husband, her migraine headaches were gone. She was the grouchiest, meanest lady in the world. She was terrible. And as soon as she started having this affair with this other guy, her personality just changed 100%. I mean, it was the oddest thing in the world. It was so strange. So,
I have a question.
yes.
Can you differentiate between like Munchausen syndrome and someone who's just a hypochondriac?
Yes.
How do you help me?
Somebody who's a hypochondriac thinks they're sick. And somebody with Munchausen syndrome knows they're not sick.
But just once.
They wants to be sick. They need the attention. They're looking for the
That makes
attention.
sense.
The hypochondriac isn't especially looking for the attention. They think they're really sick. They're like germ phobic, that kind of thing. Anyway, so we solved the problem of the lady. Now the strange thing was, you think the long haul truck driver was just a jerk, and that's why she didn't like him. And that's why she was so grouchy. Nicest guy in the world, just the nicest guy in the world. They just didn't click. Something was wrong. And as soon as that lady started that affair with the other guy, her personality changed 100%. And her husband would come in from time to time. And of course, we didn't want to talk about it, but of course we did talk about it. The fact that he knew exactly when she started having the affair because her personality changed for the better. And he knew that there was something wrong because there was something right. It was just the most bizarre thing in the whole wide world. Anyway, okay. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Munchausen syndrome. No, we're talking about fabrication.
Is this like the same as when people, I hate to say it, they fake being suicidal for attention?
Okay, suicide's a totally different situation. Totally different situation. Yeah, they are looking for attention, but we wouldn't diagnose them with Munchausen syndrome. We wouldn't diagnose them with hypochondriasis, which doesn't exist anymore. Okay. We'll talk about that in just a second. No, it's not the same situation. That's an individual that actually is looking for attention, and it's a totally different situation. Interesting combination, or trying to put the two together is really kind of interesting. Like malingering, the degree of accuracy in the feigned presentation is likely a function of the level of sophistication of the person's understanding of the disorder. So the more they know about the disorder, the better they are at faking the disorder. Okay.
Oh my God.
And now that we have the internet, oh my God, it's so horrible. You can look stuff up on WebMD and find out exactly how to act. In the old days, you had to go to the library and look it up in a PDF or something. I mean, you had to find it someplace. Now it's just right there on the internet. So this is happening more and more and more, as strange as that may seem. So why are these people acting this way? Why are they trying to act sick when they're not really sick? What's happening that they need to do this? The answer is nobody's paying attention to them, just like the lady that I was talking about. Did she really have migraine headaches? Well, she didn't have any migraine headaches after her husband left. So did she really have migraine headaches? Or did she not want to have a conjugal visit with her husband when he came home? I know. I don't know. And did that give her a headache? Thinking about her husband. I don't know. It's hard to say. But as soon as she left, it was all good. Typical symptoms worsen when the individual is aware of being observed. The prevalence estimate of 1% among hospitalized patients is not very useful because feigning is probably not detected with great accuracy, and a person's ability to make the symptoms appear authentic may improve as interactions with the medical professionals increase, as strange as that may seem. So as a medical professional, I don't want to find out if this person's faking or not. I just want to give them their medication and go get out of the room. That's what I want to do. And of course, that's the way the doctor is anyway, right? Doesn't the doctor just want to treat you and get away from you? so that he can write up all the stuff that he needs to write up. He just wants to throw pills at you, right? Okay, and that's perfect for this guy. That's perfect for this person. And as a medical professional, I don't want to know anyway. I just want to treat them and get out of the room. I don't want to kill them. Well, maybe, usually, sometimes. Factitious disorder imposed on another involves falsely presenting symptoms in another person. And this is exactly what Ashley was talking about. This is known as factitious, or in the DSM-4 it was called factitious disorder by proxy. We've changed the name, of course, making it simpler. In this condition, the false symptoms are produced in behalf of another individual. It's typically under the who is under the individual's care. This is known as factitious disorder imposed on another person. On another. Factitious disorder imposed on another. I thought the proxy was a much better word. But of course, we've changed everything now. Usually the perpetrator is whoever is taking care of the child. In this case, it's usually the mother. Like factitious disorder, external incentives are for the deception are absent. You really can't understand why they're doing it. They're doing it for the attention. It makes them look good. This is a famous case where the mother was injecting the child with feces. Famous case, the child was taken away from the mother. That's the mother, that's the daughter. 15 years later, guess who came back and started living with the mother again? The daughter. She said she missed her mother for 15 years. They tortured her by not letting her near her mother. She thought her mother was doing a good job of taking care of her, and so she came back. I know, as odd as that may seem. Anyway, this is a really famous case. It was in Massachusetts. And now they're suing the state of Massachusetts for taking the child away from the mother.
That's kind of complicated too, because look at like Stockholm syndrome, something
Right.
like that.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
interesting.
Yeah. Really kind of tragic and sad and
Yeah.
ugly and unfortunate and everything else. Somatic symptom disorder involves multiple physical complaints that disrupt daily life. It can be specified as mild, moderate, or severe, depending on the number of symptoms. There may or may not be underlying medical conditions. You just have a physical symptom. Those with the disorder tend to worry about illness a great deal and interpret their symptoms as overly serious or threatening in spite of evidence to the contrary. The disease concerns which cause distress but do not reach delusional intensity typically have lasted at least for 6 months. We used to call this hypochondriasis. We don't anymore. We call it somatic symptom disorder. They think that they're sick. And sometimes you can think that you're sick. Remember I told you the story of over Christmas break, not Christmas break, where was I? Yeah, Christmas break. I thought I had an appendicitis. I was afraid I had an appendicitis. And the dog had stepped on my gut. Yeah. And so I went to the doctor and they were sure that I had appendicitis. And then they did all the tests. And as soon as I found out it wasn't appendicitis, it didn't hurt as much as it did before. That was the bizarre part. It didn't hurt as much. That makes sense, doesn't it? I guess I'm the opposite of hypochondriasis. Okay. That's the girl that was taken away from her mother. The disorder appears to be more common in females than males. It is difficult to get an accurate estimate of the incidence of the disorder, but the DSM-5 suggests it may be 5 to 7% of the population are people who are hypochondriacs. As odd as that may seem. I know that's a lot. When I was working in the clinic, it seemed like it was 80%. We get the same people over and over and over again. I told you about the lady with the migraine headaches. Was she a hypochondriac? Was it real? Was it a psychological problem? Who's the one that gets to decide? The doctor he just was real happy that she didn't come in anymore. He didn't care if it was hypochondriasis or not. He was just happy that she didn't come in. Psychogenic or psychologically caused non-epileptic seizures were reported in between 10% and 20% of the patients who were referred to epilepsy centers in Britain. In other words, as many as 10 to 20% of the people coming in, 1 out of every 10 people had Hypochondriasis. They thought they were epileptic, so their seizures weren't real. 10% of the people, or up to 20% of the people. This is in England. I know we're saner than the Brits. I think we're saner than the Brits. The incidence of people who experience 6 or more symptoms from 2 or more bodily sites is about 1.8% of the population. And of course, the problem is now we have all these symptoms on the internet, and you can find all the symptoms that you want. And you can find out what's supposed to happen next, so you can act like it's going to happen. As I suspected, he has acute pretendicitis. What's a causal factor for somatic symptom disorder? Somatic symptom disorder is more frequent in those who have experienced recent stressful life events, have low socioeconomic status, and have fewer years of education. Sexual abuse has been found to be 9 times more likely in the background of somatic symptom disorder patients than in matched patients with major depressive disorders. Really? Now, does this make any sense? These people really think that they're sick. They're hypochondriacs. Now, why in the world would sexual abuse have anything to do with this? Why would this cause them to think that they had physical symptoms? That they actually had a physical problem? Why? Sexual abuse. Why do they think that they're sick now? They feel that they're sick. They don't know that they're not sick. So why would these people suffer more frequently from somatic symptom disorder? Because they were sexually abused as children. Why? There's a logic to it.
The attention.
I'm sorry?
Like the attention.
They're looking for attention? Or do you think they're looking for attention? Certainly not from their abuser.
Yeah.
Right. So why would it be more likely that they would have these problems?
Cry for help.
It's normal for them. When they grew up with it.
If you're being sexually abused, well, what do you want? What do you want? No, you're not looking for love. That's the last thing you want. You don't want to love. You want to leave you alone. Right?
Intervention?
Prevention, exactly. It's prevention. So in order to protect themselves from their sexual abuser, they would feign illness. They would act like they're sick. And eventually it got to the point where they weren't feigning anymore. They actually were having the symptoms. Oh, I think I'm going to throw up. That kind of thing. So guess what happened next? They really did throw up. Did they have the flu? No, they're just trying to protect themselves from their abuser. So that's one of the reasons why. I mean, it's very logical. One thing follows the other.
So they made themselves sick?
Yeah, sure. You can make yourself sick. If I thought the pain I had in my side was extreme until I found out I didn't have appendicitis, and then pain dissipated. Sure. I thought it was worse than it was. Of course, it didn't have anything to do with anything else, but I just thought I was sick. So these individuals are the same way. They've been feigning illness in order to protect themselves, and now that they're older and they don't need to protect themselves anymore, they've conditioned themselves to do this. So now they have somatic symptom disorder. Is all that logical? Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Yeah, one thing follows the other. It's very logical that they would do this. Causal factors. Behavioral perspectives generally focus on the consequences that somatic symptom might present to the sufferer. The cognitive viewpoints typically involve the unduly harsh catastrophic appraisals that sufferers make of their symptoms. The psychoanalytic perspectives tend to view medical symptoms as evidence of anxiety produced by unconscious conflicts, often involving sexual themes. And of course, the reality is that 1 out of every 6 boys experiences sexual abuse, and 1 out of every 4 girls suffers sexual abuse. So let's stop right here, and we'll pick this up next time. I apologize for